And now, at last, Marvel's Spider-Man, aka Spider-Man on PS4, aka there have been so many Spider-Man games that we're running out of titles to differentiate them. Seriously, you go to look up a game called Spider-Man online, you could be referring to the good for its time and still holds up alright PlayStation and Nintendo 64 outing, the first movie game, the PS4 title, and I'm sure there's some crappy one on the Game Boy just called Spider-Man 2. With Activision having bled the series dry with game after poorly designed game riding the coattails of Spider-Man 2 for success, Insomniac Games has inherited the license and made their debut with Marvel's Spider-Man, aiming to give a definitive take on Spider-Man in video games similar to what the Arkham games mostly accomplished for Batman. And after years of waiting and eager anticipation, I'm delighted to say Marvel's Spider-Man lives up to the hype. By no means is it flawless, but if it's not the best Spider-Man game that's been made, it's damn close to it. First things first, I love this game's opening. The game starts in Peter's apartment, and in one panning shot, we're caught up to date on this Spider-Man status quo. He's moved out of Aunt May's house, he's big into gadgets, he's been Spider-Man for a while and fought a good chunk of his main villains, but not the really huge ones. Spider-Man 2 reference. Personal life and finances are a total wreck. Even the simple note that his costume stinks adds more depth to him. Then this pumping fun music builds until he launches out of the city and starts web swinging with a rockin' tune. It sets the mindset that Peter partially uses Spider-Man as an escape for his personal problems, but it also gets you pumped to start the game! The first big thing Marvel's Spider-Man does better than any of the other games is world building. This is the first Spider-Man game that set out to create its own world and continuity rather than shrugging and gesturing towards the comics or movies, and they've gone the extra mile to flesh out the main characters. In most adaptations, Peter's dating Mary Jane because that's what he's always done. He has a job taking pictures because that's what he's always done. Who cares? More action. Here, Peter is portrayed as barely even trying to keep his personal life together, but he also has ambition, working as a lab assistant for Otto Octavius because he's desperate to do some real world-changing work. By fleshing him out as a character instead of relying on pop culture osmosis or familiarity with the comics, Spider-Man is made a more compelling protagonist. Every other Spider-Man game, Mary Jane is only used as a plot device, the damsel you have to rescue to move the plot forward or pad the story out. Mary Jane in this game is a revelation. She's an investigative reporter, hungry to make a big career for herself. She isn't afraid to wade into dangerous situations. She doesn't take Peter's crap. They broke up for reasons that Peter and MJ both gradually come to terms with. An early line of dialogue has her confusing heroism with glory-seeking to show that she's still naive and doesn't know as much as she thinks. For the first time in these damn games, Mary Jane is a fully fleshed-out, likable character with her own agency in the plot. Even if they kinda turned her into Ginger Lois Lane. Aunt May, who I struggle to think of a single game where she's appeared in the flesh, has a career managing a homeless shelter. She's Peter's rock and an engaged and likable character rather than being another burden on Spider-Man 2 The Sinister Six on Game Boy. Aunt May was in that one. Even Harry, who doesn't appear in the game itself, is given personality as his side quest has you working on philanthropic research, while implying he's got more than one dark secret that he's not telling you. And oh my god, I love Yuri, the police captain that works with Spider-Man. The back and forth between her and Spider-Man is pure gold.
You're in luck, Yuri. Your favorite tough but lovable, grizzled, seen-too-much detective is in town.
What? No. You promised you wouldn't do that
Spider Cop.
Please, no.
It's nice to have a Spider-Man game where at least half the city and cops actually like him as opposed to the entire city hating him because that's what the comics did. Other nice touches include the ability to interact with civilians and multiple side quests coming from civilians to make the city feel more alive, a Spider-Man Twitter feed and the pause menu that reacts to the things you do, and over an hour of audio clips of J. Jonah Jameson reimagined as a far-right media pundit ranting that all of Spider-Man's good deeds are false flag operations. This is just the best and most well-defined universe that any Spider-Man game has had, full of likable and engaging characters, and a city that you get invested into. Web swinging and navigation are easily the best they've been since Spider-Man 2. Swinging here revolves around momentum. The longer you swing at a time, the faster you go, and you can maintain a pretty high speed and cross the city quickly if you go far enough without hitting a wall or landing. There's a primal satisfaction to maintaining a high speed as long as possible, like you're keeping a really good combo going, especially with the addition of moves to build and maintain speed quickly, like super jumping off the ground, diving off buildings, and zipping to a purge point and launching off of it. For finer maneuvers, you've got the classic web zip to yank yourself in a direction quickly, the ability to zip to perch points and walls for precise positioning, way to incorporate the amazing Spider-Man game's web rush mode and make it not suck, and wall running, which has always controlled like crap in these games, is effortless and lets you cross buildings quickly. The best Spider-Man games have always treated the web swinging like an extreme sport, and with so many techniques to keep yourself at a high speed, this swinging system is a total blast to use. I kinda prefer the web swinging in Spider-Man 2 just because the web zip and super jump were totally overpowered and fun to use, but the navigation here is honed to near perfection. In fairness, Spider-Man 2 had missions that were a maddening chore because you had absolutely no precision with the web swinging, which this game doesn't have that problem, so it's not like any system is perfect with these games. Another improvement over the other games, there are a ton of varied and fun side missions. Several of the side missions revolve around challenging your prowess with the web swinging. Research stations running errands for Harry issue unique movement challenges. The game invents a compelling reason for the race and ring flying challenges by having Taskmaster challenge you to stop bombs or chase drones to push your precision and speed to their absolute limits. And pigeons. You can chase pigeons for a homeless dude to test how trivial a justification you need for a swinging challenge. There are a boatload of collectibles to encourage you to just dick around the city between lost backpacks with lore-giving Easter eggs. Peter's lost 55 backpacks across the city! And landmarks to photograph like Avengers Tower and the Sanctum Sanctorum. Fun fact, they cut Trump Tower out of the city and put Kingpin's hideout in its place. If you've got an itch for the combat, there are several enemy bases where you'll find the biggest combat encounters in the game by a vast margin, as well as Taskmaster combat and stealth mastery challenges. Petty crimes make a return with a variety of criminal activities popping up at random, from car wrecks to chases to burglaries to bomb threats to tracking kidnapped victims, only they're far less annoying than they have been in prior games because they're fast. You're swinging by, a crime pops up, you drop down and do it, and you move on. They're barely an interruption, and you're not punished for ignoring them. That I know of. Couple that with bonus Tombstone and Taskmaster boss fights, several side missions tracking down missing persons and following up leads from civilians, and there's a fantastic variety of side missions to the game. You don't have to do any of the side quests, but they give you tokens that are used to purchase gadget upgrades, suit mods, and my favorite, you use them to purchase new outfits. If, like many people, you're not wild about the game's signature white Spider Emblem suit, you are not stuck with it. You can switch back to the classic suit anytime, and you almost immediately start unlocking alternative suits. The first suit you can get is Spider-Man Noir, so Peter ran into Mary Jane for the first time after their breakup looking like a brooding emo who thinks he's Batman. Yeah, the game even keeps your chosen suit during cutscenes, and each costume has a battle-damaged skin if you're wearing it in a scene where Spider-Man gets his ass kicked. If Marvel Spider-Man were developed by any other mainstream publisher, I guarantee you these suits would be sold separately for $1 to $2 a piece. Hello, Arkham Games! Or these days, chopped into pieces and hidden in loot boxes. Hello, Injustice 2 and Destiny 2! There are a grand total of 28 suits in the game, with more on the way as DLC missions are in development, and each suit is purchased by just doing the side missions and farming tokens to buy the suits that you want. Mainly you unlock the suits by doing petty crimes, base battles, and Taskmaster challenges, the really optional stuff you might otherwise skip. The Taskmaster challenges can be annoying to get high scores, but I was still actively seeking all of them out because I wanted to set Spider-Man's face on fire, goddammit! Not only does each suit look gorgeous with new lighting effects applied when necessary, not only do most suits have their own superpowers that come unlocked with them, like area effect attacks and becoming bulletproof, but once you purchase a suit, you can equip its ability to any suit that you want, so you're not stuck with an ugly suit or useless power. My personal favorite was the sleek black and neon green big-time suit that actually glows everywhere you go, and the MCU Stark suit's Spider Bro power, which summons a drone who lays waste to the land with electric grenades that damn near one-shot kill an entire group of enemies at once. My God!
I'll check it out and get back to you.
Spider Bro rules! Highly desirable rewards to encourage you to do the side content. What a novel concept! How nice to see a game not devalue itself or tank its progression to bilk its audience for extra cash! Oh, and the game is balanced so that you don't need to get perfect scores on every challenge to unlock all of the content, so 100%ing the game isn't torture. The game's combat is good, just lacking in variety, with a lot of fights boiling down to 3 enemy types, with whip guys and swordsmen being rare. Square punches, triangle does a ranged web strike attack, circle dodges when the Spidey sense prompt appears and can be timed precisely for perfect dodges, and as you fight you build focus meters that you can either use for instant takedowns or to heal. The inspiration from the Arkham games is pretty clear, especially with the addition of gadgets, but the game shakes things up enough from the Arkham formula that it feels distinct and fresh. Most of the enemies carry blunt weapons that block your basic attacks, so you have to disarm enemies, dodge into walls and launch off to attack, get them into the air, or throw objects in the environment at them. Plus, most enemies can knock off huge chunks of your health bar at once, necessitating crowd control with gadgets that web up enemies. I love the general idea of the combat, reflecting that Spider-Man is the perpetual underdog who has to use his wits rather than fight directly, but between persistent dodging and the fact your uppercut plows through blocking enemies, it's pretty easy to cheese your way around the more complex combat mechanics. On the bright side, the combat is challenging enough that fighting dudes never got to feeling repetitive to me. Another cool feature, if you encase an enemy in webs and then throw them into a wall or floor, that enemy is immediately defeated with no questions asked, which is an innovative way of incorporating Spider-Man's primary powers into combat and encouraging creative use of gadgets to set up instant kills. The gadgets are fun when I remember that I have them, mostly taser webs that stun small groups, impact webs that blow enemies into walls, and web grenades that immobilize multiple dudes at once and set them up for instant kills. As you play the game, you also unlock mods, 3 of which can be equipped at once to customize Spider-Man to suit your playstyle. I always fought enemies directly, ignoring gadgets and leaping away to heal if I got caught off guard, so I used 2 mods to get faster and stronger heals, and a mod that slows time when you land a perfect dodge to kind of freeze enemies automatically. It's a fighting style that I call minimizing variables, and which others may call sucking at video games, but the selection of mods and varied suit powers lets you customize Spider-Man to play however you like. You can spec yourself out for more gadget uses, equip an auto heal or emergency time freeze that trigger upon death. I think there's a Shock Gloves mod to more directly reference the Arkham games. I didn't use half the abilities that I had, but I still felt every power had a viable use. The stealth levels are pretty simple. You zip between walls and perch points, scoping out areas and taking down enemies when they're isolated. If an enemy gets close to a perch point, you can stick them to walls where they won't be seen, and you can always just web zip to an enemy for a quick takedown if you're fine with leaving a body out in the open. The stealth levels are fun enough, they control well and make for decent variety, but they just have 0 penalty for screwing up. Between spider sense, dodging, and gadgets, Spider-Man has 0 difficulty taking enemies with guns head-on in a fight, so most of the time getting caught just turns the stealth encounter into a normal combat encounter, or combat immediately follows the stealth section, so you might as well have not bothered. Enemies barely patrol, you can wipe out groups of enemies by taking out one guy and then killing his friends before they raise an alarm, and even if another enemy finds a body that you've left behind, nothing happens. The guy who found the body is the only one who reacts, none of the others give a shit. Very rarely there will be a stealth encounter with a hostage where getting caught nets you an instant fail, but again, you only get a fail if an enemy directly sees you and the spider sense outright tells you which enemies can be taken down for free, so the fail is piss easy to avoid. Guys, just because the Arkham games have stealth doesn't mean that it's mandatory. Most of my complaints are nitpicks or minor annoyances. Crawling on walls is awkward, with Spider-Man getting hung up on minor obstructions and refusing to dislodge from them to swing. Web zipping to perch points has way too short a range, often leaving you flailing for any surface within reach. The game will constantly switch gadgets to the piddly little web shot when you're not looking, so you constantly wonder why your gadgets aren't working. The targeting system is unreliable, firing gadgets at the wrong enemy and throwing everything except the mission-critical item. It's drilled into your head quick to rely exclusively on spider sense to dodge enemies because the camera will never pull out to show a full enemy group. Taskmaster's challenges can have infuriatingly vague or even arbitrary scoring criteria, and I very nearly played the game to 100% completion only to stop because swinging around specific districts waiting for all the petty crimes you need to spawn gets really tedious. There are also a fair number of glitches. The game froze on me once, I've knocked a dude off a building only for him to float out in space, crimes in progress haven't been marked complete, story-related Jameson podcasts won't play correctly if you blaze through story missions, and a major cutscene glitch so that several sound effects and a major character's voice were muted, and I can't show you because it's the biggest spoiler in the game. The tile matching and pipe wiring minigames also get annoying at times, but there's literally an accessibility option to skip them, so we'll call that a wash. One major thing that sometimes got on my nerves is the stealth levels with Mary Jane and a pre-superpowers Miles Morales. There are 8 levels where either MJ or Miles has to sneak through a map of enemies with basic patrol patterns, using lures or a hacking app to cause distractions to sneak by. The stages themselves are decent little puzzles, and the levels reload in seconds when you die, so they're not annoying to play. My problem is that half of these levels are thrown in at the worst possible points in the game's story. Mary Jane's first level interrupts Spidey's stealth stealth tutorial and the introduction of the main villains, Miles is so awkwardly crowbarred into the main story that we control him trying to get to work on time at one point. Mary Jane sneaks into a Sable prison camp to interrogate a scientist literally 5 seconds before Spider-Man gets there, rendering the scene a waste of time. Hell, at one point, the game's main villain has secured a chemical bomb that can wipe out the city. The story is ratcheting up the tension. You're on the edge of your seat. You're off to fight the main villain once and for all. Perfect time for the game to screech to a halt for a long, tension-killing, slow-ass, comparatively boring Mary Jane level. Again, the stealth levels aren't bad, they're just horribly implemented in a story that already has pacing problems out the wazoo, which segues to my biggest gripe with Marvel Spider-Man. As good as the gameplay is, and it's very, very good, the story has issues. The game begins with Spider-Man arresting the Kingpin, and in the resulting power vacuum, the city is invaded by the Demons, a terrorist-like gang led by the new supervillain Mr. Negative, who has brainwashing powers. Spider-Man and MJ find out the Demons are after an Oscorp project called Devil's Breath, and most of the game is spent investigating Mr. Negative, investigating Oscorp, and looking for the weapon. There is a very long stretch of game where very little of consequence happens in the plot. You learn nothing about Mr. Negative until late in the game. The dude's a total cipher, and you chase down lead after wild goose chase lead on Devil's Breath, and the pacing just feels glacial as very few plot developments occur for hours on end. Aside from early battles with Kingpin and Shocker, there are no other supervillains besides the frankly kind of boring Mr. Negative, whose brainwashing powers aren't used for anything other than explaining why he has so many goons. He's played for mystery and paranoia, and they just don't carry the plot. The abysmal pacing isn't helped by the fact that the game is very cutscene heavy, and the plot regularly stops dead for diversions and sidetracks. The story completely grinds to a halt to establish Miles Morales' origin story, and then grinds to a halt later to insert him into the main cast. There are several points where you're forced to hike back to Otto's lab for another cutscene teasing that he'll become a supervillain someday. The story is put on hold for missions to set up side quests that have nothing to do with the plot, and the aforementioned slow-paced stealth levels pause the game at very bad and crucial moments. It honestly got to the point I'd put off doing a story mission because I wanted to do more Spider-Man stuff instead of sitting through another long cutscene or doing another stealth mission. Look, I get it. They want Mary Jane actively involved with the main story, and they want to firmly establish Miles and Otto to use in later games. I understand why the story is structured this way. But there had to be a better way of working all this into the main plot. About 2/3 of the way through the game, you defeat Mr. Negative, and then a completely different villain who's had nothing to do with the plot up to that point breaks Mr. Negative, Vulture, Electro, Scorpion, and Rhino out of prison, and the game goes full Arkham Knight. The peaceful city you've grown accustomed to turns into a full-out war zone with mass escaped criminals, Silver Sable agents, and the police brawling it out on every street corner with civilians caught in the middle, and supervillains lay siege to the city with spoiler villain pulling the strings. The story's pacing, drama, and tension dramatically ramp up as you struggle to restore order. You get some great supervillain boss battles. Even Miles and MJ get stealth levels that actually service the plot and are slid into the downtimes between major battles rather than being awkwardly shoehorned into the story. I was deeply immersed and invested into the game, from the fantastic, chaotic, constantly escalating prison breakout scene and the gut punch of your city virtually collapsing, all the way to the game's epic and deeply emotional climax. So where the hell has this game been hiding? The first 2/3 of the story are total filler. You spent several hours chasing down Mr. Negative, who only seems to begrudgingly participate in the main story, and the plot actually starts when it dumps Mr. Negative on his ass for a real villain. Mr. Negative is almost an afterthought by game's end. Again, I understand why the story is structured this way. You get used to a normal game world that goes to hell around you, and it's a damn good twist, but this really doesn't work for me. The last third of the story is almost my perfect Spider-Man game, and I wish you didn't have to slog through so much padding to get here. Also, when all's said and done, the two main villains do have compelling reasons for being supervillains, at least as far as comic book logic goes, but neither of their motivations explains why they're both dead set on destroying the entire city. Just as a side note, I love how the game has reimagined Scorpion from another guy in a suit to a lethal mercenary and discount scarecrow. He loads his tail stinger with neurotoxins, and there's a fantastic level where Spider-Man has to race through the city while tripping balls on Scorpion's poison. If you're gonna rip off Arkham, you rip it off right. Also, I really want to applaud the game's ending for flipping the biggest bird imaginable to the status quo of the comics. It took balls to go where this game goes, and it really does deserve praise. Marvel's Spider-Man is a fantastic game that feels like a culmination of this series up to this point. It's probably the most complete experience that a Spider-Man game has achieved so far. The web swinging has been fine-tuned to perfection, the combat is solid, the side content is fun and engaging, and the world and characters are compelling and engrossing. Its only missteps are some questionable stealth levels, the combat could use more variety, and the plot takes way too long to get going, but once you reach the third act and the game fires on all cylinders, I think it truly is the great Spider-Man game that we've been waiting for. I guess all that's left to be said is, suck it, Activision!
Living on the edge, fighting crime, spinning webs, swinging from the highest ledge. He could leap above